The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched wider than any human building could ever dream of reaching. 47 different species sat in their designated sections, and each one had their own way of showing disapproval. The bird-like Crethan clicked their beaks in rhythm. The floating gas beings called Nethros pulsed with dark colors. The insect Vrelians rubbed their many legs together, creating a sound like grinding metal. All of them were angry, and all of them were staring at one man. Jake Morrison stood in the center of the chamber floor. His blue suit looked plain compared to the exotic forms around him. His brown hair was going gray at the temples. His face showed the kind of tired that comes from fighting the same battle too many times. He had been Earth's ambassador for 12 years now. 12 long years of trying to make aliens understand that humans were not the enemy. The speaker for this session was a Zixathari named Crystalline Voice of the Depths. Her species looked like living glass shaped into the rough form of a person. Light passed through her body and split into rainbow colors that danced on the walls. When she spoke, her voice came from every direction at once. She said that humanity had broken the rules again. She said humans had built 12 new warships in the outer colonies. She said humans had tested weapons that were forbidden by the ancient laws. She said humans had explored regions of space that were marked as restricted. Her voice grew louder with each accusation. The other species made their own noises of agreement. Jake waited for her to finish. He had heard all of this before. Different words maybe, but the same message. Humans were too aggressive. Humans were too curious. Humans asked too many questions and did not listen to the answers they were given. Humans needed to be controlled. When Crystalline Voice finally stopped talking, Jake took a slow breath. He looked around the chamber at all those alien faces. Some he had learned to read over the years. Others remained mysteries. He wondered if any of them would understand what he was about to say. He started speaking in a calm voice. He reminded them that humans had joined the council 200 years ago. He reminded them that humans had followed most of the rules most of the time. He reminded them that every time humans had broken a rule, it was because the rule did not make sense for a species like humanity. The Vrelian ambassador, whose name meant something like 1,000, legs in sunlight, made a chittering sound of disgust. He said that every species thought their own way was special. He said humans were not unique in wanting exceptions. He said the rules existed for good reasons and humans needed to obey like everyone else. Jake felt something inside him getting ready to snap. It was not anger exactly. It was more like the feeling you get when you realize you have been trying to open a door by pushing, when you should have been pulling. All this time wasted on the wrong approach. He said that maybe the problem was not that humans wanted exceptions. He said maybe the problem was that the council wanted every species to be the same. He said maybe the council had forgotten that different species needed different solutions. The chamber erupted with noise. The Crethan screeched. The Nethros flashed angry red. The massive rock beings called the Foundation rumbled so loud the floor shook. But Jake kept talking and his voice got harder. He said humans had tried for 2 centuries to fit into the council's vision. He said humans had shared their music and their stories. He said humans had traded their resources and their knowledge. He said humans had sent their children to council schools and their scientists to council labs. He said humans had done everything asked of them except give up being human. Crystalline Voice spoke again. She said the council was prepared to be generous. She said if humanity agreed to dismantle their outer defense fleets, the matter could be forgotten. She said if humanity agreed to allow council inspectors into all their research facilities, the restrictions could be eased. She said if humanity agreed to limit their colonial expansion to approved systems, then peace could continue. Jake looked at her for a long moment. Light continued to dance through her crystalline body, creating patterns that might have been beautiful if he was in the mood to appreciate them. He thought about his daughter who was serving on one of those defense fleets they wanted dismantled. He thought about his son who was doing research on one of those forbidden technologies. He thought about his wife buried on a colony world that the council said humans should abandon. He said no. The chamber went quiet. The word hung in the air like smoke. No species had ever just refused a council directive before. There were procedures for appeals. There were methods for negotiation. But simple refusal was not something the council knew how to handle. Jake continued. He said that humanity was done trying to be something they were not. He said humans were done apologizing for being human. He said humans were done accepting rules that did not allow them to protect themselves. He said that effective immediately humanity was withdrawing from the Galactic Council. The silence broke like glass. Every species started talking at once. The translators built into the chamber walls could not keep up with the overlapping voices. Words crashed into each other and created noise that meant nothing. The Vrelian ambassador managed to make himself heard over the chaos. He demanded to know if humans understood what they were doing. He said that leaving the council meant giving up all trade agreements. He said it meant giving up all territorial protections. He said it meant being alone in a galaxy that did not care about them. Jake smiled, but there was no happiness in it. He said that humans had always been alone. He said the council had made sure of that by treating humans like children who needed constant supervision. He said maybe it was time to see what humans could do without the council holding them back. He turned and walked toward the exit. His shoes made soft sounds on the smooth floor. Behind him, the chamber was still roaring with angry voices. Threats were being made. Consequences were being listed. None of it mattered anymore. As he reached the door, Jake looked back one last time. He saw the Zixthari speaker floating in her section. Her crystalline form was pulsing with colors he had never seen before. He wondered if that meant surprise or fear or something else entirely. He supposed he would never know now. He said goodbye to the council. His voice was quiet, but somehow it carried to every corner of that massive chamber. Then he walked out and the door sealed behind him with a soft hiss. Above Earth, the defense platforms were already receiving their new orders. Fleet Admiral Kate Sullivan sat in her command chair aboard the orbital station called Guardian's Watch. She was reading the message that had just arrived from the council chambers. Her weathered face showed no expression, as she read it twice to make sure she understood. Then she opened a channel to every human ship and station in council space. Her voice was clear and firm when she spoke. She said it was time to come home. She said Project Exodus was now active. She said every human vessel had 48 hours to begin withdrawal. Across dozens of systems, human ships started moving. Trade vessels left alien ports. Colony transports recalled their shuttles. Research stations began packing up equipment. Diplomatic staff gathered their belongings. 200 years of presence in council space started to collapse inward like a reverse explosion. The aliens watched with mixed feelings. Some were glad to see the troublesome humans leave. Others worried about what it might mean. A few tried to convince human friends to stay, but the humans had made their choice. Kate Sullivan smiled as she watched the reports come in. Every ship accounted for. Every station responding. Humanity was going home, and this time they would not be asking permission for anything. She opened a secure channel to a facility that officially did not exist. When the face appeared on her screen, she gave a single order. She said to begin Phase 2 of Project Exodus. She said 50 years should be enough time. She said when the council finally realized their mistake, it would already be too late. The face on the screen nodded and the channel went dark. Kate leaned back in her chair and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there in the deep dark, something was coming. Something the council refused to believe existed. Something humanity had been preparing for since that first terrible encounter so many years ago. Let the council think humans were running away. Let them think humans were sulking like children. Let them believe whatever made them feel superior. In 50 years, they would learn the truth. In 50 years, they would understand what humans had been, trying to protect them from all along. But by then, it might be too late. 50 years passed and the galaxy moved on like water, flowing around a stone. The council held their sessions in the same great chamber. New ambassadors took the places of old ones who had died or retired. The Zixthari got a new speaker. The Vrelians elected a different hive mind to represent them. The Krethan went through 3 generations of diplomats, but none of them had ever seen a human in person. The younger aliens sometimes asked about the species that had left. The older ones would make dismissive gestures with whatever appendages their species used for such things. They would say that humans had been too proud. They would say humans had wanted to play by their own rules. They would say it was better this way because humans had always been trouble anyway. But nobody really knew what had happened to humanity. The human systems had gone completely dark. Every attempt to scan their territory was met with interference that made sensors useless. Radio signals disappeared into static. Quantum communication simply failed to connect. It was like someone had drawn a curtain across that entire region of space. A merchant captain named Ixthor had tried to breach the human border once. He was a Krethan whose feathers had turned gray with age, but whose eyes were still sharp with greed. He had heard stories about human goods from his grandfather. chocolate and coffee, and something called whiskey. He thought maybe after 50 years the humans might be willing to trade again. His ship was called the Prophet's Wing, and it was small and fast. He took it to the edge of what used to be human space. His sensors showed nothing but empty void ahead. No ships, no stations, no signs of life at all. He wondered if maybe the humans had all died out. He pushed forward slowly. His crew of 5 watched their instruments nervously. They crossed the old border and nothing happened. They went deeper. Still nothing. Ixthor started to relax. Maybe the humans really were gone. Then his sensors screamed a warning. 3 objects had appeared around his ship. They had not been there 1 second, and then they were there the next second. No jump signatures. No engine trails. Just suddenly there like they had always been. They were defense platforms. Each one was the size of Ixthor's entire ship. They bristled with weapons that his computer could not identify. A voice came over his communication system. It spoke in perfect Cretan, which was strange because the translator should not have been needed. The voice was calm and polite. It said that this territory was closed. It said that Ixthor's ship would be escorted back to the border. It said that any future attempts to enter human space would be met with less friendly responses. It thanked Ixthor for his understanding and cooperation. Ixthor tried to argue. He tried to explain he just wanted to trade. The voice cut him off. It said the message was not a negotiation. It was a statement of fact. The 3 platforms moved closer. Ixthor decided arguing was a bad idea. They escorted him back to the border. When his ship crossed the line, the 3 platforms simply vanished again. No jump signatures. No engine trails, just gone. Ixthor's crew sat in shocked silence for several minutes. Then they turned their ship around and flew away as fast as their engines would allow. Ixthor reported what happened to the council. He expected them to be outraged. Instead, they just made notes in their records and thanked him for the information. The Zixathari speaker said it proved humans were still alive. The Vrelian ambassador said it proved humans still wanted to be left alone. Everyone agreed it was best to respect their wishes. The galaxy had bigger problems anyway. The council was fracturing. Old alliances that had held for thousands of years were crumbling. The architects had started expanding aggressively into neutral zones. They were a species of artificial intelligence housed in crystalline matrices. They did not need planets like biological species did. They built massive structures in deep space and considered empty systems to be their natural territory. The Zixthari Protectorate was falling apart from internal conflicts. Different faction groups wanted different things. Some wanted more trade, some wanted more isolation, some wanted to reform the council entirely. They argued and schemed and occasionally fought small wars among themselves. The Vrelian collective was facing economic collapse. Their entire society was built on trade networks that connected hundreds of worlds. But those networks were failing. Pirates raided shipments. Rival species imposed tariffs. Some routes became too dangerous to use. The Vrelians tried to adapt, but they were too rigid in their thinking. Council meetings became shouting matches. Species that had stood together against human aggression now turned on each other. The careful balance of power that had existed for millennia was breaking down. Nobody seemed to know how to fix it. A military commander named Lisa Grant was charting deep space when she found something that made her forget all about the council's political problems. She was human, but she had been born after the withdrawal. She had never seen an alien in person. She had only heard stories from her parents about what the galaxy used to be like. Lisa's ship was called the Far Reach, and it was designed for long-range exploration. She had been mapping gravity anomalies in an empty region when her sensors detected something impossible. There was a massive gravitational distortion in an area that should have been completely empty space. She adjusted her course to investigate. Her training said to be cautious, but her curiosity was stronger. She approached slowly and carefully. Her sensors were having trouble getting clear readings. Whatever was out there was big. Very big. Then her visual sensors finally got a lock and Lisa felt her blood turn to ice. It was a fleet. Ships stretched in perfect formation across millions of kilometers. Each vessel was easily 10 times larger than the biggest council battleship. Their hulls were made of something dark that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. They moved in synchronized patterns that suggested a single controlling intelligence. Lisa's computer tried to analyze their design. It could not match them to any known species. The materials were unknown. The energy signatures were unlike anything in the database. These were not council ships. They were not human ships. They were something else entirely. She watched them for 20 minutes while her systems recorded everything they could. The fleet was heading in a specific direction. She calculated their trajectory and felt sick. They were heading toward council space. Not directly, but they would reach it eventually. Maybe in a few years. Maybe sooner. Lisa knew she needed to warn someone. But who would listen to a human? She activated her jump drive. The far reach began to fold space around itself. In her last seconds before jumping, she saw something else on her sensors. More fleets, dozens of them, all heading the same direction. She jumped to the nearest council station. It was a small outpost on the edge of explored space. Maybe 50 people worked there. Most of them were Cretan with a few other species mixed in. Lisa had never spoken to an alien before. She did not know what to expect. She broadcast an emergency signal. The station responded with confusion. They asked who she was. She said she was human and she had critical information. There was a long pause. Then they gave her permission to dock. The station commander was an old Cretan named Brightfeather in mourning. His plumage was mostly white with traces of the blue it had been in his youth. He listened to Lisa's report with growing alarm. He watched the recordings she had made. He asked her to repeat certain details 3 times to make sure he understood correctly. When she finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. Then he said they needed to contact Earth. They needed to warn the humans. They needed help. Lisa asked why they needed to warn Earth. Brightfeather looked at her with something like pity in his eyes. He said that 50 years ago, humans had tried to tell the Council about a threat from deep space. He said the Council had not believed them. He said humans had called these invaders the Devourers. Lisa felt cold spreading through her chest. She asked if Brightfeather had tried contacting Earth. He nodded slowly. He said the Council had been trying to reach Earth for 5 years. He said every message went unanswered. He said the humans had closed their borders completely. He said whatever was coming, the Council would have to face it alone. Lisa looked at the recordings of that massive fleet again. She thought about all those ships heading toward inhabited space. She thought about what would happen when they arrived. She thought about billions of people who had no idea what was coming. She said they needed to try harder. They needed to make the humans listen. They needed to explain that this was exactly what humans had warned about. Brightfeather made a sound that his translator rendered as bitter laughter. He said the Council had spent 50 years pretending humans did not exist. He said they had dismissed human warnings as paranoid fear. He said they had driven away the one species that might have helped them. He said it was too late for apologies now. The station's sensors suddenly screamed an alert. Something was approaching fast. Multiple contacts, big ones. Brightfeather pulled up the tactical display and his feathers stood on end. It was them. The Devourers. They had arrived. The attack came without any warning signals or demands or attempts at communication. Brightfeather barely had time to sound the evacuation alarm before the first weapons struck the station. The walls shook and the lights flickered. Lisa grabbed onto a support beam as the artificial gravity failed for 3 seconds, then came back online. She heard screaming from other sections of the station. The Devourer ships did not look like ships when they got close. They looked like massive chunks of twisted metal that had been melted and reformed by something that did not understand symmetry. Dark surfaces covered in what might have been sensors or weapons or something else entirely. They moved with purpose but not grace. Brightfeather tried to activate the defense systems. The station had basic shields and a few plasma cannons meant for deterring pirates. Against these things they were useless. The shields collapsed after 2 hits. The cannons fired, but their shots seemed to get absorbed by the dark hulls without causing any damage. Lisa watched the tactical display. More Devourer ships were arriving. They were surrounding the station. She realized they were not trying to destroy it quickly. They were studying it, learning about it. She felt sick when she understood what would come next. Brightfeather ordered everyone to the escape pods. 50 people scrambled through corridors trying to reach the pod bays. Some made it. Some did not. Lisa saw a young Cretan technician get caught when a bulkhead collapsed. She tried to help, but Brightfeather pulled her away. He said they could not save everyone. They reached a pod bay. 20 people crammed into pods designed for 12. Lisa and Brightfeather shared a pod with 4 others. The launch sequence seemed to take forever. Through the viewport, Lisa could see the Devourer ships moving closer to the station. The pods launched. Small chemical rockets pushed them away from the dying station. Lisa looked back and saw the Devourers doing something to the station's hull. Dark tendrils extended from their ships and touched the metal. Where they touched, the station began to change. The metal seemed to dissolve and flow like liquid. It was being consumed. Bright Feather activated the pod's emergency beacon. He set it to broadcast on all frequencies. He recorded a message warning about the Devourers. He said they were real. He said they were here. He said anyone who received this message needed to run. The pod scattered in different directions. It was basic survival tactics. Harder to catch multiple small targets than one big one. Lisa watched her pod's sensors. The Devourer ships ignored them. They were too busy consuming the station. Within an hour, there was nothing left but empty space and floating debris. The pod drifted for 6 days before a Council patrol ship found them. It was a Vrelian vessel called the Steady Purpose. The crew was confused about why pods were drifting in empty space. Then they saw the debris field and the confusion turned to alarm. They brought the survivors aboard. Medical teams treated injuries. The captain was a Vrelian named Ixnar, who had 400 years of military experience. He listened to Bright Feather's report with his 6 eyes focused and unblinking. When the old Crethan finished talking, Ixnar was silent for a long time. Then he said they needed to return to Council space immediately. He said the Admiralty needed to see this. He said everything was about to change. The trip took 3 days. During that time, the first reports started coming in. The architects had lost an entire colony cluster. 5 massive space habitats that housed millions of crystalline mines. Gone. Consumed. The architects sent a battle fleet to investigate. The fleet was destroyed. Only one ship escaped and it was badly damaged. The Zixthari lost a mining operation in the outer reaches. 2,000 workers and their families. The mining platforms were torn apart and processed. Witnesses reported dark ships that appeared without warning and left nothing behind. By the time the Steady Purpose reached Council space, everyone knew something terrible was happening. The Council called an emergency session. Every species sent representatives. The chamber was packed for the first time in decades. Lisa stood next to Bright Feather in the witness area. She had never seen so many different species in one place. It was overwhelming. She noticed they were all afraid. Fear looked different on different faces, but it was always recognizable. The Zixthari speaker called the session to order. Her crystalline form pulsed with stressed colors. She said the Council faced an existential threat. She said preliminary reports indicated an invasion force of unknown origin. She said casualties were already in the millions. The architect representative spoke next. Its artificial voice had no emotion, but the words were grim. It said analysis of captured Devourer technology showed weapons that operated on principles their science could not explain. It said conventional defenses were ineffective. It said they needed new strategies. Ixnar presented his report. He showed recordings from the survivors. He showed what the Devourers did to the station. He showed how they consumed everything and left nothing behind. The chamber watched in horrified silence. Then a junior Crethan diplomat named Swiftwing stood up. Her voice was shaking but determined. She said they needed to contact the humans. She said humans had warned about this threat 200 years ago. She said humans might know how to fight these things. The chamber erupted in argument. Some species agreed immediately. Others refused to consider it. Pride was a powerful thing even in the face of extinction. The debate went on for hours. Finally, the Zixthari speaker called for a vote. The question was simple. Would the Council authorize contact with humanity and request assistance? The vote was close, but survival instinct won over pride. The motion passed. They assembled a delegation quickly. 5 ships from 5 different species. Each one carried ambassadors and officers and copies of all the data they had collected on the Devourers. They were given authority to negotiate whatever terms humanity demanded. The delegation jumped to the Sol system. They arrived with weapons powered down and broadcasting peaceful intentions on every frequency. They expected to wait. They expected suspicion. What they got was an immediate response. A voice came over their communications. It spoke in perfect translations for each species. It said they were being monitored by Earth Defense Command. It said they could approach the 3rd planet slowly. It said any hostile action would result in immediate destruction. The tone was professional but absolutely serious. They approached Earth cautiously. Their sensors detected defense platforms scattered throughout the system. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. The technology was beyond anything in Council databases. These were not the weapons humanity had possessed 50 years ago. A space station appeared on their sensors. It was massive, bigger than the old Council diplomatic hub. The voice directed them to dock there. They complied. The station was called Liberty's Gate according to the markers. Inside the docking bay, the delegates saw human workers moving cargo and maintaining equipment. Everything was efficient and organized. Everything looked military. A young human officer met them. He introduced himself as Commander Steve Parker. He was maybe 30 years old with short brown hair and calm gray eyes. He listened to their request without expression. When they finished, he nodded once. He said they needed to wait. He said someone with authority would speak to them soon. He escorted them to a waiting area. It was comfortable but clearly designed to keep guests contained. The delegates sat and worried. Steve returned 2 hours later with an older woman. She wore a naval uniform covered in medals and insignia the delegates did not recognize. Her silver hair was cut short. Her dark eyes had the look of someone who had seen too much. She introduced herself as Fleet Admiral Karen Hayes. She said she commanded Earth's defensive forces. She said before they discussed anything else, the delegates needed to understand something important. Karen activated a holographic display. Images filled the air. The delegates leaned forward to see. What they saw made them understand why humans had left the Council. Karen explained that humanity had encountered the Devourers 230 years ago. A colony ship called the New Dawn had been exploring a remote system. They found a destroyed alien civilization. Everything was gone. The planets were stripped to bedrock. Even the stars seemed dimmer. While the New Dawn was investigating, Devourer ships arrived. The colony ship tried to run, but it was too slow. 2,000 people died. Only one shuttle escaped. It carried 15 survivors and fragments of Devourer technology. Karen said humanity had analyzed those fragments. They had learned what the Devourers were and what they wanted. They had calculated when the Devourers would reach Council space. They had tried to warn everyone. The Zixthari delegate asked why the Council had not believed them. Karen's expression hardened. She said the Council had dismissed the evidence as falsified. They had said humans were manufacturing threats to justify military expansion. They had accused humanity of warmongering 23 separate times. The Vrelian delegate named Ixnar spoke up. He said that was all in the past. He said they believed humans now. He said they needed help desperately. Karen was quiet for a moment. Then she said help would come, but it would not be free. She listed humanity's terms: full sovereignty over 15 systems, not 12, complete military autonomy, no Council oversight of any kind, no restrictions on research or defense programs, permanent seats on all Council military committees. The architect delegate protested. It said these terms were excessive. It said humanity was exploiting their desperation. Karen looked at the artificial being with cold eyes. She said the terms were non-negotiable. She said humanity had spent 50 years preparing for this war, while the Council pretended everything was fine. She said they could accept the terms or face the Devourers alone. The delegates conferred quietly. They knew they had no real choice. Pride was worthless when your civilization was dying. They agreed to humanity's terms. Karen smiled, but there was no warmth in it. She said human fleets would begin deployment immediately. She said they would coordinate with Council forces. She said they would push the Devourers back. Then she said something that made the delegates uncomfortable. She said this war would be long and brutal. She said many would die. She said the galaxy would never be the same. She said they would win, but the cost would be terrible. She asked if they understood what they were asking for. The delegates nodded. They had no other option. Karen dismissed them and they returned to their ships to carry the news back to Council space. Lisa watched them leave from an observation deck. Bright Feather stood beside her. The old Crethin asked if she thought the humans could really win. Lisa thought about those defense platforms that had appeared from nowhere. She thought about the massive station and the confident way the humans moved. She thought about 50 years of preparation. She said yes, the humans would win. But she wondered what the galaxy would look like when it was over. The delegation returned to Council space with news that divided every species. The emergency session was called within hours of their arrival. The great chamber was packed with representatives who had not attended a meeting in years. Fear had a way of making politics suddenly seem important again. The Zixthari speaker floated at the center of the chamber. Her crystalline form pulsed with colors that indicated stress and uncertainty. She announced that humanity had agreed to help. The chamber erupted in relief. Then she announced the terms, and the relief turned to outrage. The human demands were read aloud. 15 systems under complete human control. Full military autonomy with no council oversight. No restrictions on research or weapons development. Permanent seats on all military planning committees. Access to all council intelligence networks. The right to maintain military bases in council territory. The architect representative spoke first. Its artificial voice was cold with anger. It said the terms were outrageous. It said humanity was using the crisis to extort concessions. It said they should refuse and find another way to fight the Devourers. The Vrelian ambassador Ixnar rose to respond. His aged exoskeleton creaked as he moved. He said there was no other way. He said the Devourers had already destroyed 3 architect colony clusters, and the architect fleets had been powerless to stop them. He said pride was worthless when your species was dying. The debate raged for 6 hours. Some argued that accepting the terms would give humans too much power. Others argued that rejecting the terms meant certain extinction. The younger diplomats tended to favor acceptance. The older ones who remembered human aggression were more reluctant. Finally, a Cretan elder named Winds Over Mountains spoke. She was 300 years old and her feathers were completely white. She had been alive when humans first joined the council. She said she remembered voting to restrict human expansion because she feared what they might become. She said she had been wrong. She said fear of what might happen was foolish when faced with what was happening right now. The vote was called. The chamber fell silent as each species registered their decision. The count was close, but survival instinct won over pride. The motion passed with 62% approval. Within hours, the news was transmitted to Earth. Within days, the first human fleets began arriving at the front lines. Captain Ryan Foster stood on the bridge of the Earth defense ship Valiant. It was a battleship-class vessel that dwarfed any council warship. The bridge was designed for efficiency. Every station had a purpose. Every crew member knew their role. Ryan was 35 years old and had spent his entire adult life training for this moment. His orders were clear. Jump to the Tixara system where a council fleet was making a desperate stand against Devourer forces. Reinforce them. Push back the enemy. Show the galaxy what human ships could do. The jump took 3 hours. When the Valiant and its escort fleet of 20 ships emerged into normal space, Ryan saw a battle that was already lost. 12 council ships were burning. 8 more were trying to retreat. The Devourer fleet had 30 vessels surrounding the planet Tixara. Ryan opened a channel to the council fleet commander. It was a Zixthari named Harmony of Still Waters. Her voice was strained and exhausted. She said they had been fighting for 16 hours. She said they could not hold much longer. She said the planet below had 4 billion people who would die if the fleet fell. Ryan told her to fall back behind his formation. He told her his ships would take over. Harmony hesitated. She said the Devourers were too strong. She said the council had thrown everything at them and failed. Ryan smiled, but there was no humor in it. He said the council had never fought alongside humans before. He said they should watch and learn. The Valiant moved forward with its escort ships in perfect formation. They had practiced these maneuvers 10,000 times. Every pilot knew exactly where to be. Every gunner knew exactly when to fire. It was like watching a dance where every step had been planned years in advance. The Devourer drones detected the new arrivals and swarmed toward them. Ryan gave a single order. His weapons officer pressed a button. 20 ships fired simultaneously. The space between the human fleet and the Devourer drones lit up with energy. Plasma bolts and particle beams and railgun rounds filled the void. The Devourers had shields, but human weapons had been designed specifically to break those shields. They had studied captured Devourer technology for 50 years. They knew every weakness. The first wave of drones died within seconds. The second wave tried to scatter, but human targeting computers predicted their movements. The third wave got close enough to return fire. Their weapons hammered against the Valiant's shields. The shields held. They had been built to withstand exactly this kind of punishment. A council observer aboard a Vrelian ship watched in amazement. He saw the human vessels moving in coordination that seemed impossible. He saw them creating overlapping fields of fire that left no gaps. He saw them using the debris from destroyed drones as cover while they repositioned. He said into his recorder that he was watching the most advanced military operation he had ever seen. Ryan directed his fleet through the battle like a conductor leading an orchestra. When the Devourers tried to flank, he had ships already in position. When they concentrated their fire, he dispersed his formation. When they attempted to retreat, he cut off their escape routes. The Devourer command ship was twice the size of the Valiant. It had been the anchor of their fleet. Council forces had been trying to destroy it for days without success. Ryan studied it for 30 seconds, then gave his orders. All 20 human ships focused fire on a single point on the command ship's hull. It was a weak spot in the armor that Council sensors had not detected. Human sensors were better. The concentrated fire punched through shields and armor and into the ship's core systems. The command ship broke apart in a cascade of explosions. Without it, the Devourer fleet lost coordination. The drones began making mistakes. The remaining ships tried to organize, but they were too slow. Human forces pushed forward and destroyed them one by one. 6 hours after arriving, the battle was over. The Devourer fleet was gone. Tixara was saved. Ryan sat back in his command chair and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Then he opened a channel to the Council fleet. Harmony of Still Waters appeared on the screen. Her crystalline form was pulsing with colors Ryan's computer translated as amazement and gratitude. She said she had never seen anything like what the human fleet had just done. She said it was impossible. She asked how they had trained to such a level. Ryan told her it was not training alone. He said humans had spent 50 years studying the Devourers. He said they had analyzed every scrap of data from that first encounter. He said they had built their entire military around fighting this specific enemy. He said when you knew your enemy that well, victory became a matter of execution. News of the victory at Tixara spread across the galaxy within hours. More human fleets arrived at other battle zones. Each time the result was the same. The Devourers had been unstoppable against Council forces. Against humans, they died. But it was not just superior technology. Admiral Karen Hayes made that clear in a transmission to all Council military commanders. She explained that human tactics were built on something the Council had forgotten. Humans had been preparing for total war, not police actions or territorial disputes, but actual survival-level conflict. She said every human child learned basic military skills in school. She said every colony had defense militias. She said every civilian ship could be converted to military use within hours. She said humanity had turned their entire civilization into a weapon aimed at the Devourers. The Council began to understand what they had lost when they drove humans away. Not just military strength, but the mindset that created it. The willingness to sacrifice everything for survival. The ability to focus an entire species on a single goal. Lieutenant Chris Morgan flew his fighter alongside a Varelian pilot named Zethan during a battle over the planet Helios Prime. They had been fighting together for 3 weeks now. They had learned to anticipate each other's moves. They had saved each other's lives multiple times. During a break in the fighting, they met in the carrier's recreation bay. Zathan's species did not drink alcohol, but they enjoyed a beverage that had similar relaxing effects. Chris had coffee. They sat together and talked about the battle. Zathan said humans were crazy. His tentacles coiled in what Chris had learned meant amusement. He said humans took risks that no sane species would consider. He said they flew into situations where their death was certain and somehow survived. He asked if all humans were like this. Chris laughed and said no. He said humans were just as scared as anyone else. He said they just had a lot of practice ignoring fear. He said when you spent 50 years preparing for the worst, you either learned to face terror or you broke. Most humans had learned to face it. The conversation was interrupted by an alert. More Devourer ships detected. Both pilots dropped their drinks and ran for their fighters. There was no time for fear. There was only the mission. The war ground on. System after system was contested. The Devourers were pushed back, but they did not retreat easily. Every world they lost, they tried to consume before leaving. Every battle cost lives on both sides. The casualty numbers climbed into the billions. Admiral Karen Hayes stood in the command center on Earth watching the tactical displays. Red markers showed Devourer positions. Blue markers showed human and Council forces. The blue markers were advancing, but the progress was slow and bloody. A junior officer approached with a report. 12 human ships lost in the last engagement. 3,000 crew dead. Karen read the names and felt each one like a weight on her shoulders. These were her people. These deaths were her responsibility, but she could not afford to dwell on loss. There were still battles to fight, still worlds to save. She gave orders for the next deployment and turned back to the displays. A Zixthari liaison named Crystal Song stood beside her. She asked how Karen could continue when the cost was so high. She asked if Karen ever regretted agreeing to help the council. Karen was quiet for a moment. Then she said regret was a luxury they could not afford. She said the choice had been made 200 years ago when humans first encountered the Devourers. She said everything since then had been inevitable. She said you could not see danger coming and then turn away when it arrived. She said humans would fight because that was what humans did. Crystal Song said the council had been wrong to dismiss human warnings. She said they had been wrong to drive humanity away. She said the price of that pride was being paid in blood. Karen agreed but said there was no point dwelling on past mistakes. She said the only thing that mattered now was winning. She said afterward there would be time for reflection and reform. She said maybe the galaxy would learn something from all this death. The officer returned with another report. A major Devourer fleet had been detected heading for the Nexus. It was a strategic location where multiple jump lanes met. Whoever controlled it controlled access to a significant portion of the galaxy. Karen looked at the fleet composition. Nearly 1,000 Devourer ships. It would be the largest battle of the war. She gave orders to assemble every available human and council vessel. She contacted Fleet Commander Ryan Foster and told him to prepare for the fight of his life. Ryan acknowledged the order. He gathered his commanders and began planning. The Battle of the Nexus would determine the war's outcome. Win and they could push the Devourers back permanently. Lose and the war might drag on for decades. He looked at his officers and saw determination mixed with fear. They all knew what was coming. They all knew the cost would be terrible. But they also knew they had no choice. This was what they had trained for. This was why humanity had prepared. The fleets began moving toward the Nexus, human and council ships flying together. The galaxy held its breath and waited to see if pride and mistakes could be overcome by courage and sacrifice. The war lasted 7 years and changed everything. 7 years of fighting across 1,000 different worlds. 7 years of species that had barely trusted each other learning to fight side by side. 7 years of horror and courage and sacrifice that would be remembered for generations. 7 years that proved the galaxy could stand together when it had no other choice. Lieutenant Chris Morgan had graduated from the academy 3 months before the war started. He was 22 years old and had never fired a weapon in actual combat. His first battle was over a planet called Meridian 5. He flew a fighter designated Hawk 7 in a squadron of 12 ships. The squadron leader was a Vrelian named Sathan who had been fighting since the war's first day. His voice over the comm system was calm despite the chaos around them. He told the squadron to stay in formation. He told them to watch their vectors. He told them they would make it through this. Chris did not feel like he would make it through anything. His sensors showed 50 Devourer drones approaching. Each one was 3 times the size of his fighter. They moved in patterns that seemed random but somehow always put them in the perfect position to attack. Xa then called out targets. Chris locked onto the nearest drone and fired. His weapons were human plasma cannons modified to interface with Vrelian targeting systems. The shot hit and the drone's shields flared. It took 3 more hits before the drone broke apart. The battle lasted 4 hours. Chris lost count of how many drones he destroyed. He saw 2 fighters from his squadron get torn apart by Devourer weapons. He heard the pilot scream and then go silent. By the time it was over, he was shaking so hard he could barely land his fighter. In the debriefing room, Zathen approached him. The Vrelian's tentacles moved and what Chris had learned was a gesture of respect. He said Chris had done well for his first battle. He said it got easier. Chris did not believe him, but he nodded anyway. That was how the war went. Humans and aliens learning to trust each other because they had to, learning each other's tactics and combining them into something new, learning that despite all their differences, they could fight together. The battles were brutal. The Devourers did not negotiate or retreat or show mercy. They came to consume and they did not stop until they were destroyed. Every world they touched was stripped bare. Every station they reached was torn apart and processed into more ships and more weapons. The Council lost entire systems. The Crethan homeworld was evacuated just hours before the Devourers arrived. 15 billion birds fled in whatever ships they could find. They watched from orbit as their planet was consumed. The oceans boiled away. The continents cracked and crumbled. Within a week, there was nothing left but a dead ball of rock. The Zixthari lost their capital station. It was a crystalline structure that had floated in space for 10,000 years. 500 million beings lived there. The evacuation was incomplete when the Devourers struck. Half the population escaped. The other half died when the station shattered into a billion glowing fragments. Humanity lost 12 colony worlds. Worlds that had been settled for generations. Worlds where children had been born and raised. Worlds that people called home. The planet New Texas was glassed by Devourer weapons. 3 billion people died in a single day. The survivors were evacuated to other colonies, but the loss cut deep. Captain Lisa Grant lost her entire family on New Texas, her parents, her 2 brothers, her sister and her sister's children. They had been visiting the capital city when the attack came. There had been no time to evacuate, no time to say goodbye, just a flash of light and then silence. Lisa continued fighting because there was nothing else to do. She transferred to a frontline carrier and flew reconnaissance missions deep into Devourer territory. She mapped their fleet movements. She identified their supply lines. She did her job and tried not to think about what she had lost. The turning point came at a place called the Nexus. It was a region where multiple jump lanes converged. Control the Nexus and you controlled access to half the galaxy. The Devourers knew this. The Council knew this. Both sides committed everything they had. Fleet Commander Ryan Foster led the human forces. He commanded 200 warships and coordinated with 500 Council vessels. Against them were nearly 1,000 Devourer ships, including 3 of their massive motherships. The battle lasted 9 days. Ships burned. Crews died. Space itself seemed to scream with the energy being unleashed. Ryan barely slept. He stayed on the bridge directing his fleet and coordinating with the Council commanders. On the 7th day, his flagship took a direct hit that killed 40 crew members. The ship's executive officer was among the dead. Ryan promoted a young ensign to the position and kept fighting. On the 8th day, the largest Devourer mothership broke through the defensive line. It was heading for a Council supply depot that held enough fuel and ammunition for 6 months of fighting. Ryan made a decision. He ordered his flagship and 12 other ships to intercept. They rammed the mothership at full speed. 14 ships carrying 8,000 crew members crashed into the Devourer vessel and detonated their reactor simultaneously. The explosion lit up the Nexus like a new star. When the light faded, the mothership was gone, and so were the human ships. Ryan survived because he was not on his flagship. He had transferred to a cruiser to coordinate the final assault. He watched his former ship die along with everyone still aboard. He watched thousands of people sacrifice themselves to protect people they had never met. The remaining Devourer forces broke after that. Without their command ship, they lost coordination. Council and human forces pushed forward and destroyed them systematically. The Battle of the Nexus was over. The tide of the war had turned. The fighting continued for another year, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Devourers were pushed back system by system. Their fleets were hunted down and destroyed. Their last mothership was cornered in deep space and torn apart by combined fire from 100 ships. When the final Devourer vessel was destroyed, the galaxy celebrated. Every species held ceremonies. Every world lit fires and sang songs. Victory was sweet after so much loss, but some people could not celebrate. Lisa stood in a memorial garden on Earth looking at a wall covered in names. Billions of names, human and alien together, all the people who had died in the war. She found her family's names etched into the black stone. A Zixthari diplomat named Crystal Song approached her. The alien's form pulsed with sympathetic colors. She asked if Lisa thought it had been worth it. Lisa was quiet for a long time. Then she said no. Nothing was worth losing the people you loved. But it had been necessary. Sometimes you had to fight not because you wanted to, but because the alternative was worse. Crystal Song said the Council wanted to reform. They wanted humans to take a leadership role. They wanted to build something better than what had existed before. Lisa said that would be good. Then she asked Crystal Song to leave her alone. The diplomat bowed and walked away. Lisa stood and looked at her family's names until the sun set. The post-war galaxy was different in fundamental ways. The council restructured completely. The old system where species competed for influence was replaced with a federation where everyone had a voice. Humans were given seats on every major committee. The restrictions that had driven humanity away were abolished. Military cooperation became permanent. Joint fleets patrolled the borders. Mixed crews became common. Human and alien officers served together. Training programs were shared. Technology was exchanged freely. The walls between species began to break down. Admiral Karen Hayes was now very old. She had commanded Earth's forces through the entire war. She stood at the dedication ceremony for the Memorial Fleet. It was a formation of 100 ships that would patrol the galaxy's edge forever. Half were human designs, half were council designs. All flew flags that represented unity. Karen gave a speech that was broadcast to every inhabited world. She said that 50 years ago humanity had left because the council would not listen. She said humans had prepared for the worst because they knew it was coming. She said when the danger arrived, humans had not abandoned the galaxy even though it would have been easier. She said the council had learned too late what humanity was trying to protect. Not just human worlds, but every world. Every species. Every child playing in the sunlight without knowing about the darkness in deep space. She said the question now was whether the lesson would stick. Would the galaxy remember what happened? Would they stay prepared? Would they face future threats together? Or would they forget and become complacent and force humanity to stand alone again? The galaxy had no answer, but in the years that followed, every species maintained strong defense forces. Research into new weapons and shields continued. The borders were watched carefully. Nobody wanted to be caught unprepared again. Commander Steve Parker became an instructor at the new Joint Forces Academy. It was built on a neutral station between human and council space. Students from dozens of species trained together. They learned tactics and strategy, and most importantly, they learned to work as a team. Steve often told his students about the dark years. He said humanity had not wanted to be right about the Devourers. He said they would have been happy to waste resources preparing for threats that never came, but they had been right. The threat had been real. He said the lesson was simple. When someone warns you about danger, you should listen. When someone prepares for the worst, you should not mock them, because sometimes the paranoid ones are the only ones who survive. The story of humanity's isolation and return became legend. Parents told it to children. Teachers used it in history lessons. It was carved into monuments and painted in murals, a reminder that pride could be deadly, a reminder that unity was strength, a reminder that the guardians should never be ignored. Lisa eventually returned to active duty. She commanded a cruiser on the border patrol. She spent her days watching the deep dark for any sign of new threats. She knew they were out there. The universe was too big and too old for the Devourers to have been the only danger, but now the galaxy was ready. Now they stood together. Now they listened when someone said the darkness was coming. Humanity had left. The council had dismissed them. The Devourers had come. Everyone had learned what happens when you ignore the warnings. The lesson had been written in blood and fire across 100 worlds, but they had learned. And learning meant they might survive whatever came next.